Hey everyone, it's Blake, and today I'm going to be going over the parts of an argument. This is going to seem like a pretty basic video, going over some really fundamental stuff, but because it is so fundamental, it's absolutely essential that everybody has a very good understanding of the type of material that I'm going over here. So even though this may seem easy, I strongly encourage that y'all pay close attention. So why does this matter so much that we go over something as simple as like what is an argument? That seems like kind of common sense, but throughout this video, I'm going to teach y'all a method of organizing arguments that ensures that every time you make an argument, the judge is able to evaluate it. So because debate is inherently an activity that has rules and a competitive aspect, it's not just enough to make arguments like you would normally. You have to kind of follow the rules that are essential for you to actually get credit for the arguments you're making. So if you want to win, if you want to make arguments that help you win, it's important that you follow certain rules, and this method will make sure that you are always following those rules and giving the judge enough to evaluate those arguments. And also, organized argumentation is really important if you're trying to improve speaking ability. A lot of times in LD, people think being a good speaker is talking fast or loud or making numerous arguments, but really ask any judge, really, and they'll tell you that an organized speech that has arguments that have a 100% hit rate, even if there are less of them, is always going to get better speaker points than somebody that just rambles through a bunch of half-completed arguments. So any judge out there is going to give you higher speaker points if you're more organized and make sure that your arguments are fully well-formatted. And then also just having a deeper understanding of arguments and the way to structure arguments and the way that persuasion works increases the strength of your case writing. Case writing is something that every debater is always improving on. Nobody is ever a perfect case writer, so it's always important that we are improving our fundamental skills, and this one in particular will help you understand what the different ways to optimize and improve your cases are. So every argument has three parts. So every argument has three parts. The parts are a claim, a warrant, and an impact. So these terms should all seem familiar to you, but I'll go over them really quickly. A claim is just what your argument is. It is just the thing that you are asserting in plain language. A warrant is why the claim that you made is true. A warrant should have proof and justification, and what I mean by that is that it's not just enough to say that, there is a study conducted and 70% of people agree with you. You need to explain why people agree with you. A warrant should answer the question of why, and numbers can't tell you why. They can verify that something is true, but we need to get that explanation. So proof is always really strong and persuasive to talk about studies or methodologies and statistics and empirics and stuff like that, but make sure that you're justifying why things turned out the way they did in those studies and using that explanation to further develop an understanding of your claim. And then the last part is an impact. Just like with everything else in debate, an impact is just why it matters, why the judge should vote on it, and why it's important. So just to kind of reemphasize how important this structure is, I'll kind of go backwards and show you all what it's like if we don't have these parts. So if we don't have an impact, then what we're left with is a claim and a warrant. So basically we're telling the judge, here's what we're asserting, here's why it's true, and then we move on. And while that might make a point to some people, to the judge, it's really hard for them to understand where that fits into the round. So they can't really make a decision, they can't really evaluate your argument in the context of the other things unless you tell them what exactly this argument proves, what it is resolving, or where this fits into the flow. So this impact is important, otherwise the judge can't understand why you took the time to make this argument. But what if instead of no impact, we had an impact, but we did not have a warrant? So a warrant is the part that is the proof, it is the part that does the heavy lifting, it's the part that's going to be the longest out of these three parts. So if we don't have it, then we just have a claim and an impact. So we're just asserting something and telling the judge that this thing is really important. But because we're humans, we're inherently skeptical of things that are told to us, and the judge is not just going to give you automatic credence. It's especially important that you have strong warrants if you're making claims about the world that are typically left to experts. So, for instance, if you're talking about the probability of a nuclear war happening or something along those lines, and you just say, the probability of a nuclear war is extremely high, this is really important because XYZ, the judge is going to be left kind of scratching their head and wondering, why is it so high? Why is it so high that I ignore other impacts in the round? And they're more likely just ignore this whole argument as a whole if you can't back it up. And that one's pretty self-explanatory. So what if we have our impact and we have our warrant, but we don't have our claim? So with a warrant and an impact, you're doing the part that is the hardest of making the argument. You are proving something true, and you are very succinctly explaining to the judge why it matters that this thing is true. But without a claim, the whole argument gets kind of jumbled. So what I mean by making an argument that doesn't have a claim is that if you just jump right into it, if you just say, on my opponent's first contention, a study found blah, 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 and give all this justification, this amazing statistical evidence, and back it up with a really strong explanation, and then tell the judge this is super important, that's all good work that you've done on the flow. But then when the judge is looking back at that contention, they're going to kind of be thinking, what was that argument about again? Because remember, the judge has to flow the round. They have to make really quick notes, and giving them a claim is a way for them to kind of put a calling card to the argument you are making. So if you don't give them a succinct claim, it's going to be very hard for them to remember that argument and how important it was, even if you did a great job warranting and impacting it. So because we now understand why each of these three parts are so important, we understand that every single time in a debate we are making an argument, or anytime we are writing a case and we are structuring our arguments, we need to double check and make sure that all three parts are here: a claim, a warrant, and an impact. And this should become second nature to you, but it's going to take a while. You're going to have to do a lot of drills. You're going to have to give a lot of rebuttals. But eventually, once you realize how intuitive this system is and get in the habit of understanding what all three of these things look like applied, it's going to be a lot easier for you to do stuff like this on the fly in your rebuttal. So anytime you're making your basic responses, you're making a turn or a solvency claim or anything along those lines, you can blow through all three of these parts pretty quickly. So let's look at an example first. So for this first example, we're going to pick something a little bit more lighthearted than most of what we're talking about in debate. I'm not trying to start any fights here. I don't have any opinion on this. I'm just going to go with the route that I could find evidence for to put this slide together. But so the topic that we're going to use for this example is resolved dogs are better than cats. So the claim that I want to make is that dogs are more likable than cats. So this is pretty succinct. It's pretty straightforward. There's not any words here that you can really cut out without confusing the meaning of the sentence, and you totally get what I'm talking about when I say more likable than cats. That's a pretty straightforward claim. So now let's back it up with a warrant. According to a study done by Dr. Denise Castillo of Carroll University, 60% of Americans identify as dog people, whereas only 11% identify as cat people. So this is a good study. I've backed it up. I've given some credibility to the author and the the source of this study, it coming directly from a university. And I'm giving these statistics that really back it up and prove that there might be some substance to my claim. But this is just the proof. I'm going to need some justification. Why is there such a drastic difference in percentages? So my warrant isn't quite finished yet, so I'll add this next part, that this difference is likely caused by the differing personalities of pet owners. The majority of dog owners were extroverted, whereas cat people are more introverted. Because extroversion is more common in the US, this means a random citizen is more likely to have a dog than a cat. So here you can see that in the second part of the warrant, I'm specifically talking about the cause behind the difference that is coming from the proof. So I'm pretty directly doing the part where I'm justifying the proof that was provided. We want to use clear language there so the judge knows exactly what we're doing. Now that we've done the warrant, we've given our proof and our justification, let's go ahead and impact to bring this home. So because dogs are more likable, it suggests that they bring more popular value to society than cats and are therefore the superior pet. So this impact, again, is pretty succinct, and it ties everything kind of together in a neat bow. So I can say because dogs are more likable, because the warrant is what proved that dogs are more likable, and then I'm implicating it out. I'm saying that it suggests that they bring more popular value to society, making them the superior pet. In this last part of the impact, I'm tying back to the resolution the original question that was being asked. And that's because the biggest role that the impact plays is explaining why this is so important in the context of this round. Why does the judge care that dogs are more likable? Because the judge's job is to decide where they stand on this resolution, and this claim is directly proof that the resolution is true. So other things to point out about this example, obviously this is set up more in a speechy way than we'll see laid out in debate. Typically, we'll need to see carded evidence and stuff like that when we're talking about studies like this one that I'm talking about up here with Dr. Castillo. However, what we can see here that is true of actual debate arguments is that the warrant is the vast majority of this argument, and that's because the warrant is the part that, like I said before, is doing the vast majority of the heavy lifting. So the claim and impact should be succinct and as short as possible. The warrant is also really important that it's clear and that we're not using a bunch of filler words, but we don't need to be as stressed if the warrant is taking up more time, because that's the part that is the hardest to do. So now that we've gotten kind of an example that is a bit broad in its understanding of argumentation, let's bring it into the context of debate. So the basic syllogism of a claim, then a warrant, and an impact occurs all over debate in a case itself and also in rebuttals. Like I mentioned before, whenever you're making an on-case argument, you're making a turn claim or something along those lines, you're going to want to back it up with a warrant and impact. So even in rebuttals are doing this. But whenever we're writing a case, we see it multiple times within the case as well. So for instance, in a single contention, the claim is like the heading. When you say contention 1 is that blah, blah, blah. The warrant is the link evidence, the first or second card that you're going to read that says why that claim is true, why the resolution suggests that this area is affected in that way. And then the impact is, of course, the impact evidence that you read at the end of the contention that talks about why this area of focus is so important. So that one is pretty straightforward and it makes a lot of sense, but something that people don't think about as much is that individual pieces of evidence within this system of claim, warrant, impact have all three parts as well. And that's especially true of really strong pieces of evidence. So some pieces of evidence don't do all these three parts, and they can serve their purpose, but they're much less persuasive than evidence that has all three parts. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show y'all a single card that I pulled from a contention, and we're going to break down the claim, warrant, and impact that we see there. So this is from the Nationals topic in 2019. So the resolution was resolved, violent revolution is a just response to political oppression. So the claim is, of course, the tag right here. So the claim is that nonviolent revolutions are twice as likely to succeed than violent revolutions. This means that the AF is urging the oppressed to use a strategy that is most likely going to fail. So what we can get from this tag that I forgot to mention earlier, but we can see it pretty clearly here that this card is a negation. So this is a neg card. But let's talk about that claim in a bit more detail. So this first line is pretty straightforward, a summary of the evidence and the research that I'm about to go over. Just the conclusion of this research is that nonviolent revolutions are twice as successful. But then the second part, I'm already doing a little bit of hinting at what the implications and stuff like that are going to be, but it's still not backed up or substantiated or fleshed out enough to really be considered an impact. I'm really just telling the judge that this is kind of the earmarker that you can use for this card, that this is the card that says that the AF is likely going to fail. So then we have our cite and then the body of our evidence. And in the body of the evidence is where we're doing most of the warranting. So using aggregate data on major nonviolent resistance campaigns, blah, blah, blah. Nonviolent campaigns achieved success 53% of the time compared to 26% for violent campaigns. So we know that this all here is warrant. I'll just put a W because I don't have enough space there. This part right here is going to be more so an example of proof, because remember, warrants have proof and justification. These are just numbers. They're not doing too much analysis. But then if we continue on to the card, it says commitment to nonviolent methods enhance legitimacy, and sympathetic publics perceive violent militants as having goals beyond accommodation, but they perceive nonviolent resistance groups as less extreme and enhancing their appeal. So this stuff right here is going to fall more into the justification camp. So what we can see here is that this piece of evidence is pretty good because it does both proving and justifying in the same few sentences. It's not an overly long card, but it gets the point across, and it definitely backs up the claim. We can even go back and check this. So it's just as important that all those parts are there that it is that all those parts connect. So nonviolent revolutions are twice as likely to succeed compared to violent revolutions. That ties directly to this. We can see that's where the statistics are from. 53 is twice as much, roughly, as 26. And then this means the AF is urging the oppressed to use a strategy that is most likely going to fail. Well, this is, of course, like I said, doing a little bit of analysis for the round, but the real claim that it's making, that the strategy of violent revolution is most likely to fail, is backed up by this right here. 26% succeed, which means that the vast majority of them, 74%, are going to fail. So this proof directly backs up the claim. We're not pulling the claim out of nowhere, but rather it's very thoroughly proven by the evidence itself. And then underneath the card, I have these implications, which are unsurprisingly going to be where I do the impacting. So the thing about doing implications under a card is that they are absolutely a great way to streamline impacting. It makes it a lot clearer to the judge that this is an important card, in that what it is saying is going to definitely come up later in the round. So if you have a piece of evidence that you don't think necessarily does all of the fleshing out or proving that you think you want it to do in terms of the impact and in the context of the debate and the resolution that is being given, feel free to throw some analytics on there. As long as, like I said, they are directly connected to the evidence, this is a great way to get those impacts streamlined. So the implications here, or the impacts here, are that 1, the AF dooms revolutionary movements to failure, meaning no positive outcomes ever come of violence that they create. And then the second implication here is that the AF greenlights authoritarian entities to tighten their oppressive grip on resistance movements due to the supposed radicality of their methods. So this one seems like it's coming a little bit out of left field, but if we were to ask the person who wrote this card in cross-ex, what do you mean by the second implication, where is it backed up in the card, they would be able to point back to this claim, that publics perceive violent militants as having goals beyond accommodation. And so that's where this supposed radicality of their methods point comes from. And then they use that to turn the AF with this first part that says that they greenlight authoritarian entities to tighten their oppressive grip. So really what we're seeing here is that the implications are taking the language of the warrant, they're taking the language of the body of proof, and they are using it to further identify the context in the round, saying that this proof, this warrant, turns the AF, or this warrant, in the case of the first implication, takes out the solvency of the AF. So these turn language written by academics into language that directly ties into argumentative terms that we are familiar with in debate. So that's kind of what the work of implications are. So again, what we have here is just one card. We have a pretty clear claim warrant impact structure, and there's a lot of strength here. Overall, this card is pretty good, but like I pointed out, and analytics could be made a little bit more directly drawn from the warrants, and the implications and claim could probably be streamlined a little bit more. So what are the key takeaways from this whole video? First of all, every argument has claim warrant impact. I've said that countless times in this video, and I recommend that you say it to yourself every time you're writing one of these arguments, at least until it becomes a second nature to you. If you're writing an argument and it doesn't have a claim warrant and impact, it's probably not going to be evaluated by the judge. Now, claims should be clear and thorough, yet concise. We want it to really cover the majority of what we're talking about, but we don't want to have 2 or 3 sentence claims or tags or anything like that, because then the judge is just as bad off as they would be if you gave them no claim at all, because they're having to write down basically the entirety of the argument on their flow, and that's just going to hurt you in the long run. And then warrants need proof and justification. It's not enough to just give statistics. You need to give why those statistics are true and back them up. So the job of a warrant is two-faceted, and it's always better to overprove than underprove. And then lastly, impacts are where we link to framework and win the round. So the impacts are where we do the part where we put it in context of the debate, we turn stuff, we make solvency claims, and we explain why these impacts matter, why the claims that we are making matter in the context of the greater framework of the debate, the weighing mechanisms that we are using, and that's how we signal to the judge that we are winning this round. So that's it for this video. Hope that it helped clarify some of the fundamental ways that we construct arguments and debate, and thanks for watching.